Welcome to The Witch's Tales, where you will be immersed in stories of mystery, magic, and drama. Prepare yourself to face unexplained mysteries, bizarre phenomena, and strange adventures that will keep you glued to your eyes. With a captivating voice, we will take you into the world of thrilling stories, where truth and legend collide, making you wonder if everything is really just fiction. A Knock at Midnight. The horror that lives within us all. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed red, a stark reminder of the time 2311. The moment I glanced at it, I felt the weight of something creeping up behind me, a sensation that clung to the air in the room. Outside, every room beyond the bedroom door felt like a lung slowly collapsing on me. I recalled my grandfather's words from years ago, the way he'd warned me, in his own peculiar way, about how the house had a personality of its own, how it changed at night. I thought it was just the ramblings of an old man, someone who'd grown a little too attached to his routines. But now, 3 weeks after his funeral, as I lay in the same house he'd lived in for decades, I began to understand what he meant. The house, with all its creaks and groans, wasn't just a structure. It was alive. The air conditioner hummed its familiar tune, but something about the atmosphere felt off. The temperature hadn't changed, but my skin felt prickled by a different kind of cold. It was a deep chill that crept inward, tightening around my throat as I lay in bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling. The stain, shaped eerily like a hand reaching down toward me, had been there since I was a child. But tonight, under the dim light, it seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. I had been living here for 3 weeks now, sorting through my grandfather's belongings, deciding what to keep, what to let go. During the day, the house seemed like any old worn family home, full of memories, the scent of old books and lavender sachets. But every night, at exactly 11:11, something changed. The air thickened, making every breath feel heavy, like I was breathing underwater. I remembered the first night it happened. I was in the kitchen, making a late-night snack, when it hit me like a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. A simple task, just walking from the kitchen to the bedroom, felt like an impossible marathon. My lungs struggled to pull air from the thickened atmosphere. By the time I reached the bedroom, I collapsed onto the bed, gasping like I had been underwater fighting for air. The second night, I was ready. I made sure to be in the bedroom before 11:11, staring at the clock with the focus of a bomb technician. As the minutes ticked by, I could feel it. The change was subtle at first, but it was undeniable. Even with the bedroom door closed, I could sense the weight settling over the house, the pressure growing thicker, like something suffocating the very air. Tonight, though, felt different. My curiosity, always my weakness, was gnawing at me with a renewed intensity. What exactly happened outside? Was it truly dangerous, or was it just uncomfortable? My rational mind insisted that it was probably just anxiety, a product of my grief manifesting in strange ways. But my body knew better. My body remembered the tightness in my chest, the blurring of my vision, and the metallic taste in my mouth as I struggled to breathe. At 23:47, I couldn't take it anymore. The need to understand what was happening burned hotter than my fear. I told myself I would just crack the door open, take a quick peek, to see if there was anything visibly different about the hallway. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. The brass felt unnaturally cold against my palm. I turned it slowly, wincing at the soft click of the mechanism, and opened the door just a crack. Immediately, I felt it. The pressure pressing against the opening, trying to force its way into the room. The hallway looked normal: family photos on the walls, the same worn carpet leading toward the kitchen. But the air, it shimmered like heat rising off summer pavement. I opened the door another inch, and the pressure grew stronger, the air even thicker. My chest tightened, and I could taste copper on my tongue. This was exactly what had happened the first 2 nights, but now I was experiencing it on purpose. I slammed the door shut, my heart racing in my chest, my forehead slick with sweat. But something else stirred within me. Something twisted a strange satisfaction. I had proven it was real. This wasn't some anxiety-induced hallucination. Something inexplicable was happening in this house every night. The next night, I was more prepared. I spent the day researching atmospheric phenomena, electromagnetic fields, infrasound, all the scientific explanations that might account for the discomfort I was feeling. But none of it quite explained what was happening here. Still, I had a framework to approach it scientifically, not just emotionally. At 23:10, I positioned myself just inside the bedroom door, my hand gripping the knob like a lifeline. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, drowning out the usual sounds of the house. As the clock flicked to 23:11, I felt it. The air pressure shifted subtly, like the house was holding its breath. I opened the door. Stepping into the hallway, the sensation hit me again, but this time I was ready. It was like diving into deep water, the pressure building as I moved further into the house. My breath was labored, each inhale a struggle, but I forced myself to move forward. The hallway seemed deceptively normal at first. I took one step, then another, and with each movement, the pressure grew. By the time I reached the living room, my vision was swimming, and my legs felt like lead. And then I saw it. The furniture had moved, not dramatically, just slightly enough to be wrong. The coffee table sat at a different angle, the armchair had rotated a few degrees, and the television remote lay on the floor, though I distinctly remembered leaving it on the arm. I could explain it away. Maybe I misremembered. Maybe the house had settled. Maybe the cleaning lady had moved things without telling me. But deep down, I knew none of those explanations were true. The sofa, my grandfather's old brown leather monster, sat in its usual place against the wall, or so I thought. Something about its placement felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I stepped further into the room, my body fighting the oppressive atmosphere. Sweat dripped down my spine, my lungs burned, and the sense of being watched intensified. That's when I saw it. A gap. The sofa had moved just an inch, maybe less, but enough to create a narrow space between the back of the sofa and the wall. Something glittered in that gap, metal, glass, I couldn't tell. But curiosity won over fear. I had to know what was hidden behind the sofa. I was about 3 feet away when it happened. The sofa slid deliberately, with intent, moving forward with a soft, echoing scrape against the hardwood floor. The gap closed completely. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the sofa had blocked my path. The once wide enough space to pass through was now barely the width of my shoulders. My breath quickened as I stared at the sofa, my heart hammering in my chest. And then it shifted again, just a little, but enough to make the space even tighter. The passage was closing. I tried to push past it, but my muscles, deprived of oxygen, were no match for the suffocating atmosphere. The sofa responded to my every attempt by shifting inward, slowly but surely, closing the gap, trapping me in the room. It was then that I remembered my grandfather's stories, his warnings about the house's moods. He'd always told me to respect the house, to acknowledge its authority. I wasn't dealing with a malfunction or a phenomenon. This was something that required appeasement. I hesitated, my pride warring with my desperation, but I cleared my throat and whispered, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come out here. I should have respected the rules." For a long moment, nothing happened. The oppressive atmosphere remained. The sofa stayed in its blocking position. I felt a pang of despair, wondering if I had lost my mind. But then slowly, the sofa began to slide backward. The pressure in my chest eased just enough for me to take a deeper breath. I didn't wait to see if the reprieve was temporary. I squeezed through the gap, stumbling down the hallway toward the bedroom. I collapsed onto the floor just as the clock turned to midnight. The air returned to normal, the oppressive weight lifting. It was as though the house had flipped a switch, returning to the benign structure I knew during daylight hours. The next morning, everything was back to its usual place. The sofa was exactly where it had been. The armchair, the coffee table, all were as they should be. But I knew deep in my gut that what had happened was real. The house wasn't malevolent. It was territorial. It had rules, boundaries that needed to be respected. And I had learned the hard way that some boundaries exist for good reason. The bedroom felt different now. I stumbled out of bed, my legs unsteady as I passed the empty seventh step and moved through the quiet kitchen. Beyond the corners, where the transparent cats used to prowl the house, was no longer haunted, but inhabited alive in a way I hadn't quite understood until now. The house had what it wanted. It had gathered me into its cycle, piece by piece, through each October's visitations. I wasn't just another temporary resident. No, I had become part of its eternal schedule. At first that thought should have terrified me, but somehow I felt a strange sense of peace. The uncertainty was gone. The dread finally made sense and was resolved. I knew where I stood now in this house's world, and there was comfort in that. I closed my eyes, waiting for sleep to take me, knowing that tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Someone would need to train next year's resident, prepare them for what's to come, to help them understand that some invitations once extended can never be retracted. The house had its own calendar, and I had finally learned to read it. Some memories leave scars. They burn themselves into your mind with such intensity that they never quite heal. They fester, lurking in the shadows, waiting to resurface at the worst possible moment. That's what the house on Maple Street had been for me, a place of haunting memories. It had been in my family for 3 generations, and as a child, I spent countless summers there. But there was one memory that haunted me, something I couldn't shake, for over 20 years. When my grandmother passed last spring, I inherited not just the house, but the responsibility of sorting through the years of accumulated possessions she left behind. The task had been weighing on me for months. The thought of returning to that house was unbearable, but I couldn't put it off any longer. There were things I needed to face, and it felt like time to confront the place that had so many secrets tied to it. The house stood in front of me now, its weathered clapboard siding and creaking floors, just as I remembered, but something was off. The overgrown driveway was littered with fallen leaves, crunching beneath my tires like brittle bones. The house loomed ahead, dark windows reflecting the overcast sky like empty eye sockets. I sat in my car for several minutes, heart pounding, with an intensity that surprised me. My mouth was dry, and I found myself staring at the side of the house, the area by the laundry room where everything had changed when I was 8 years old. It was the glass door leading from the kitchen to the porch that had ruined everything. That door had changed my life. I finally forced myself to get out of the car. My legs felt shaky as I approached the front steps. When I unlocked the door, it opened easily, almost eagerly. The musty smell of old wood mothballs and something else that I couldn't place hit me. The house felt different, frozen in time like a museum dedicated to my childhood. Doilies on old furniture, family photos everywhere, and the constant ticking of the grandfather clock marking time in a way that made everything feel too real. I started in the attic, sifting through boxes of documents and keepsakes, but it was the sounds from below that kept distracting me. The house seemed to settle differently now, creaking and groaning in ways I didn't remember. And more than once, I thought I heard footsteps. I'd paused listening, but never heard them again. Then I came across something that made my blood run cold, a box of old family photos. As I flipped through them, one detail stood out in every single photo of the kitchen. There was a dark stain on the glass door to the laundry room. It was always there, no matter when the photo was taken, no matter who had taken it. The stain was the size of a human head, with tendrils that extended outward like smoke or flames. The same shape, the same size every time. My hands trembled as I spread the photographs out on the floor. The stain appeared in photos from the 1970s, the 80s, and 90s, and even, in the most recent ones, from my grandmother's final years. It never changed, never faded. Then the memory hit me. I was 8 years old, staying with my grandmother for the summer. I had been in the kitchen when I glanced at the laundry room door. That's when I saw it, a face not quite human. It was wreathed in flames that didn't seem to give off heat. The flames moved like liquid around a face that constantly shifted, but the grin was unmistakable. A wide, knowing smile that made my skin crawl. I tried to tell my grandmother, but she dismissed it. "Too many scary movies," she said, but I knew what I saw. The rest of that summer, I avoided the kitchen, especially after dark. But now, with these photographs scattered around me, I couldn't deny it anymore. I wasn't crazy. Something had been there. Something had marked the glass, left its imprint on the house. I gathered the photos with trembling hands and went downstairs. The kitchen looked just as it had when I was a child. The yellow wallpaper, the same linoleum floor, and there it was, the glass door. I approached it slowly, my heart pounding, breathing shallow and fast. The stain was there, just like in the photos. It looked burned into the glass, as if it could never be scrubbed away. I reached out to touch it, but something stopped me. The glass was cold, but around the stain, there was a warmth that didn't make sense. I pulled my hand back. I wanted to leave, but that night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house sent my heart racing. It felt wrong. And then, in the silence, I heard footsteps in the kitchen. I lay in bed, frozen, my breath shallow. I wasn't imagining it. I could hear soft, deliberate steps on the kitchen floor, moving back and forth. I told myself it was just the house, settling old wood and creaking floors. But my body knew better. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in bed, to wait for morning. When I finally got up, the house felt alive. The kitchen was empty, but the air felt charged, like something was there watching me. The stain on the glass door began to glow, but not with light. It pulsed like it was alive, like it was breathing. The creature came then, stepping out of the shadows, its skeletal hand gripping my ankle with cold iron certainty. It wasn't human, its limbs were too long, its skin stretched tight. The face was the worst part. Eyes like black holes, a smile that stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. It smiled at me like it was enjoying the terror it saw in my eyes. As it backed away, I felt paralyzed, unable to move. It struck its back against the doorframe in a rhythmic celebration, as if congratulating itself for its victory. I could only watch, helpless, as the creature left the room. The door stood empty, but the sound of its victory echoed in my mind. I didn't know how long I lay there, but when I finally got up, I found that my friends were gone. Their rooms were empty, their beds neatly made. There was no trace of them, no sign of where they'd gone. It was like they had vanished, leaving only their belongings behind. I searched the house, but they were nowhere to be found. I couldn't leave. The car wouldn't start. The phone had no signal, and the landline was dead. I was trapped. As the day wore on, I heard them. Footsteps, whispers. The house wasn't empty. It was never empty. They had become part of it, part of whatever had taken them. By the time night fell again, I knew the truth. The creature had been collecting us. It had been hunting us, but not to kill. It had been recruiting. And I was next. I ran crashing through the window, my body desperate for escape. But they were following me, their voices growing louder, never fading, always patient. The next time the creature comes for me, I won't run, but I'll be ready. Paranoia. I knew it was no use. The officer left clearly unconvinced, and I was left with the creeping certainty that I was alone in dealing with this. Alone, that is, except for Mr. Garrison. The next stone appeared 2 days later. I wasn't even home when it happened. I returned from a quick errand to find a stone sitting on my front porch, with a crude message scratched into it. "Wanna play?" My blood turned to ice as I picked it up, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I spent the following days in a fog of anxiety, half expecting the next stone at any moment. I couldn't trust my own space anymore. Every corner of my house felt like a trap, every shadow a potential threat. Mr. Garrison's nightly rocking chair vigil continued, and no matter how much I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, every tap on the window made my heart race in a way that was impossible to ignore. I became obsessed. I found myself watching his house all day, peering through my curtains at his every movement, desperately trying to catch a glimpse of him. What was he doing? How was he doing it? Why couldn't I just stop thinking about him? The more I tried to avoid the situation, the more tightly it wound itself around me, a suffocating grip I couldn't break free from. Then the night had happened. It was late past midnight, and I had just crawled into bed, exhausted but restless, when I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap on my window. My pulse quickened, a feeling of impending dread settling in my chest. This time, I didn't hesitate. I jumped out of bed, my heart hammering in my chest, and rushed to the window. The porch was empty, just as it always was when the tap came. But there on the windowsill was the latest stone resting on the ledge. I didn't even have to pick it up to know what it said. The words were etched into my mind already. "It's too late now." I couldn't breathe. Something shifted in the air, a coldness that seemed to seep into my bones. My limbs were stiff as I backed away from the window. I was shaking, unable to comprehend what I was seeing, what was happening to me. That was the last time I saw Mr. Garrison, or at least the last time I saw him in his rocking chair. The following morning, everything seemed normal, too normal. There were no stones, no tapping on the window, and Mr. Garrison's yard looked undisturbed. But as I stepped outside to gather my thoughts, I saw something on the ground near my front door. Another stone, This one was larger, rougher, and the scratches on it were deep. I bent down to pick it up, almost afraid to touch it. But my hand betrayed me, and I grabbed it with trembling fingers. The message was simple. It's time. Around his face. He carried himself with an odd, stiff manner, as if he was constantly aware of something hovering just behind him. As he entered the laundry room, I quickly ducked behind the rows of machines, holding my breath and praying he hadn't seen me. My heart raced as I watched from my hiding spot, trying to stay as still as possible. Harold seemed oblivious to my presence at first, walking past the machines with a deliberate slowness. Then he stopped in front of machine number 7, the very one I had been using. I could barely make out the expression on his face, but there was something unsettling about the way he studied it, like he was inspecting something precious, something important. He crouched down and peered at the area above the machine where the camera was hidden. My blood ran cold as I watched his hand reach up slowly to touch the beam. He adjusted something, just a slight shift of the camera, a small click, and for a split second, I thought I saw him smile. A strange, knowing smile that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I waited, frozen for what felt like an eternity, but Harold didn't leave. Instead, he stood there silent and still staring at the camera for what seemed like forever. Then he turned and walked back toward the door, the same eerie, calculated steps as before. When he was gone, I waited another few minutes just to make sure the coast was clear. Then, heart pounding in my chest, I approached the machine. The camera still blinked with its ominous red light, but now I knew. I wasn't just being watched. I was being watched by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, someone who was waiting for me. I didn't want to stay in the building a moment longer, but I had nowhere else to go. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and fear. I began to feel eyes on me in every corner of the building. Every time I left my apartment, I imagined someone watching me, always from the shadows, always just out of sight. The camera in the laundry room had opened a door I didn't want to walk through. It wasn't just about privacy anymore. It was about control. Whoever was behind that camera wasn't just a watcher. They were manipulating the situation, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Days turned into weeks, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was never truly alone anymore. Every movement I made felt like it was being observed, analyzed. I even started to feel like the building itself was alive, as if the walls and floors had become part of the surveillance network. It felt like the very air around me was thick with unseen eyes. I confronted Morris again, but this time, something in his eyes changed. It was like a flicker of recognition, as if he already knew what I was going to say before I said it. When I mentioned the camera again, he didn't deny it. Instead, he gave me an almost pitying look. "You should leave," he said, his voice low. "It's not safe here. Trust me." The words sent a chill down my spine. I didn't know what to make of his warning, but I knew he wasn't telling me everything. I asked about Harold and the camera, but he just waved me off, muttering something about building maintenance and needing to talk to the management company. But by then, I was no longer interested in asking questions. I had to get out. I had to leave before I became part of whatever strange game they were playing. I packed my things that night, all of it throwing clothes and belongings into my suitcase without a second thought. I didn't even bother to check the laundry room one last time. I just needed to be away. But as I walked out the door, I heard something that froze me in my tracks, the soft, rhythmic creaking. From somewhere in the depths of the building, I could hear the sound again, louder this time. It was unmistakable, the sound of a rocking chair. It echoed down the empty hallway. I turned and ran. As I left the building behind, I looked back one last time. The lights in the laundry room flickered, and through the crack in the window, I saw the faintest shadow of movement. And I knew, then, that the cameras had never been about watching me. They had been about watching who would leave. The game wasn't about me at all. It was about anyone who tried to escape. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep the next night, or the night after that, because, as the days passed, and I started to find myself in new places, in new cities, the feeling never left me. That thing that had been watching. It wasn't over. Not yet. Somewhere there was still a red light, blinking. And I knew I would never be able to escape it. The corner of the room, followed by a faint squelching noise like something moving through thick mud. My breath caught in my throat as the sound grew louder, moving closer, almost as if it were making its way toward me. Panic rose in my chest, like a rising tide, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I tried to move to run, but my legs felt frozen in place. The only thing I could hear now over the pounding of my heart was that squelching, wet sound, followed by a low, rasping breathing noise that seemed to come from somewhere just beyond my reach. Something in the darkness was moving, and it was too close. Finally, my feet found purchase, and I turned, stumbling toward the door, desperate to escape whatever was lurking in the shadows. As I fumbled for the doorknob, I glanced back just in time to see something shifting in the darkness. The edges of the room were impossibly black, and whatever it was seemed to be growing from the corners, spreading out into the room like a dark stain. A low whisper reached my ears, though it felt like it was coming from inside my own head. The words were unintelligible, but they sent a wave of cold dread crashing through my veins. I felt myself rooted to the spot, my body unwilling to obey my mind's frantic orders to leave. I turned the doorknob and jerked the door open, stumbling into the hallway with a gasp. I didn't stop to look back, even though I could feel something or someone watching me from the darkness behind the bathroom door. I raced down the stairs, heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was chasing me, that something had followed me out of that bathroom. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing in on me from all sides, suffocating me with an invisible weight. I made it to the front door and wrenched it open, bursting into the cool night air. My breath was coming in sharp, panicked gasps, and I could still feel the heavy weight of the darkness pressing in on me. The street was quiet, far too quiet, but I knew it wouldn't be long before whatever had been in that bathroom followed me outside. I ran, my feet pounding against the pavement, not stopping until I reached the neighbor's house a few doors down. I hammered on the door, calling for help, but no one answered. The house was dark and silent, as if the entire street had been swallowed by the night. Eventually, I gave up and collapsed on the lawn, trembling, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I couldn't explain it. It didn't make sense. The house had been strange, yes, but there had been nothing overtly terrifying about it until now. The next day, I packed my things. I couldn't stay there, not with whatever it was lurking in that bathroom waiting for me. I left the house behind, leaving the keys with the lawyer who had given them to me in the first place. But the memories of that night still haunt me even now. Every time I close my eyes, I can hear the wet squelching noise, the whispering voices, the feeling of being watched by something just beyond the edge of my vision. I never told anyone what happened. Not really. How do you explain something like that? How do you make sense of a nightmare that felt so real? I know now that some things should never be inherited. Some houses, some spaces, have something in them that can never be explained. And some of those things don't let you go once they've marked you. Sometimes I think about that bathroom, about the wet squelching sounds and the whispers that filled the darkness. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I can still hear that low, rasping breath just beyond the edge of my consciousness, waiting for me to close my eyes. As I reached the top of the stairs, I felt a sudden pressure in the air, as if the house itself were drawing in a deep, silent breath. My skin prickled with unease, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, an instinctual reaction to something wrong, something waiting. I glanced at the spot where the hallway bent the place that had bothered me for days, the patch of fresh plaster that seemed out of place. The sensation of being watched was overwhelming. Every step felt like it was leading me deeper into the house's strange, heavy presence. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just the quiet, just the stress, but the house seemed to hum with something dark, something old. As I passed the spot at the top of the stairs, I couldn't help but look at the wall again. The outline, underneath the new paint, was clearer now, like a shadow that wouldn't fade. It almost seemed to shift, like it was alive, a presence beneath the surface. I quickened my pace, clutching the mug tighter, but the house creaked around me, echoing my every movement. I could feel the weight of the air pressing down, thick and suffocating. And then, as if in response to my unease, the temperature in the hallway dropped, the chill creeping up my spine, settling in the pit of my stomach. Suddenly, I froze. There was something different. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was expectant. A sound, soft at first, but unmistakable, began to rise. It was a low, grinding creak, like something heavy shifting in the walls, a slow, deliberate movement that seemed to match the rhythm of my heart. It was coming from behind that patch of plaster. I stood there breathless, trying to make sense of it, but I couldn't. The sound was too close, too intentional. And then, without warning, there was a sharp, high-pitched crack, the unmistakable sound of wood splintering. I dropped the mug, the ceramic, shattering on the floor in a sudden burst of noise that startled me, pulling me from the trance I'd been caught in. The hot tea splashed onto the carpet, the steam rising like mist from a grave. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears as I backed away from the wall, my pulse racing with panic. The plaster started to bulge the outline beneath the surface, stretching and rippling as if something were trying to break through. The air turned colder, and the whispering started low, unintelligible murmurs that sounded like they were coming from the walls themselves. Then something impossible happened. The wall behind the plaster seemed to warp. The patch that had once been a faint, shadowy outline now began to twist and move, pushing the new paint outward, like something struggling to escape. The house groaned and shuddered, as if it were alive, and I couldn't look away, even as terror gripped my throat. A figure began to emerge from the wall. Not a person, not human, but something that resembled a distorted, shadowed silhouette stretched and contorted as it pushed its way through. The thing was both inside and outside the house, its form folding and bending, sliding through the plaster like a liquid nightmare. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. All I could do was watch as it slowly, impossibly freed itself from the wall. It had no face, no features, only an endless, twisting blackness where its head should have been, and a shape that seemed to elongate and writhe. The whispers grew louder, filling my mind, clawing at the edges of my sanity. And then it spoke. Not in words, but in a voice. That wasn't a voice at all, more like the feeling of something brushing against the back of your mind, a suggestion, a pull, a call. It told me what I had to do, what the house required. It needed me. It needed my silence, my submission, my compliance with the rituals. It was its price for letting me stay in its space, for letting me live. The figure's twisted form seemed to reach toward me, its shape stretching, its presence pressing in like an invisible weight on my chest. I knew what I had to do, but the thought of it nearly broke me. The house was never just a house. It had never been. It was a living thing, and I had unknowingly entered its domain. Now I was bound to it, tied to its dark rituals and demands. And as the figure began to fade back into the wall, leaving nothing but the soft murmur of the house settling around me, I understood that there was no leaving. There was only the next night, the next ritual, the next promise to keep. I wasn't just living in this house. I was a part of it now. The top of the stairs near the second-floor landing to observe the events unfold. I had to see it with my own eyes, this entity that had been draining Sarah and altering our lives with its persistent presence. My heart was pounding in my chest as I prepared to witness whatever was causing the glass to sing and Sarah's body to wither. The time was approaching 9:47 p.m. The house seemed quieter than usual, as though it too was holding its breath in anticipation. I watched Sarah move to the corridor, as though drawn by some invisible force. Her face was pale, hollow, her eyes distant, as she stood perfectly still between the two stained glass panels. Her hand lightly resting on the wall, as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. I focused on the glass, half expecting to hear the familiar vibrations, but this time the sound came before I could even register the presence of the figure. A soft hum started, faint and barely perceptible, but then the vibrations grew louder, building in intensity. The glass panels began to shimmer, and the painted figures seemed to writhe in place, their eyes following every movement of Sarah's body. At exactly 9:47 p.m., the vibrations reached their peak. The glass started vibrating violently, a cacophony of discordant harmonies that filled my mind. My head throbbed with the intensity of it, as if the sound was burrowing into my skull. I could hear it not just in my ears, but within my bones. Every inch of the house felt alive with the resonance and energy I could neither explain nor escape. And then the figure appeared. She was there in the corridor, standing just beyond the glass, her form flickering like a mirage at first until she solidified. The old woman, wearing a tattered grey dress, glided forward with the same unnerving fluidity Sarah had described. Her face, obscured in shadows, was the colour of death, pale, skeletal, with dark, hollow eyes that reflected nothing but the void. The sound of the glass grew louder, filling the house, vibrating through every fibre of my being. As Sarah's eyes locked onto the woman, her lips parted, a slow and deliberate gasp escaping her. She stepped forward, compelled by something I couldn't see, something that had claimed her. Her body moved on its own, slow and jerky each step, bringing her closer to the apparition. My stomach turned, and I tried to call out to her, but the words stuck in my throat. The woman's figure began to dissolve into the shadows, her form losing substance as she passed directly through Sarah's body, just as Sarah had described in her earlier encounters. A terrible cold washed over Sarah, and she collapsed to her knees, gasping for air, her face twisted in pain. The vibrations from the glass reached an unbearable pitch, and I felt my knees buckle as the force of the sound slammed into me. In that moment, I realized the full horror of it. The entity, the woman, was not just a spirit. She was feeding, draining Sarah's vitality, just as she had done to every other soul unfortunate enough to cross her path in this house. This was no random haunting. It was a ritual, a pattern that had been unfolding for generations, a continuous cycle of life and death that no one had escaped. I rushed down the stairs, but by the time I reached Sarah, she was already rising, her face pale and exhausted. She looked at me with wide, unseeing eyes and whispered, "It's almost time to go." But her voice was not her own. It was deeper, echoing with the cold emptiness of the thing that had claimed her. The house had claimed us both. The weight of it pressed down on me, suffocating every breath I took. As I looked back at the stained glass, the figures seemed to mock us, their eyes gleaming with silent knowledge of the inevitable fate we were bound to. And then the realization hit me. We weren't just its caretakers, we were part of the pattern, part of the cycle. Sarah had been right all along. The house was waiting for us, and no matter how hard we tried to escape, no matter how far we ran, it would always find us. The stained glass trembled once more, the vibrations echoing through my chest. The whispers that had filled the air now became words soft and insistent. "You will stay. You will never leave." As the house seemed to close in on us, I understood that there would be no escape. The house had claimed its place in our lives, and now it was time for us to take our place in its dark history, and a few lockpicks left behind. The officers would have laughed at me. No one would believe me without concrete proof. So I did what anyone would do in my situation. I waited. And I watched. The fear was constant, gnawing at me, growing into something bigger than just a neighbor's intrusion. It became an obsession, a preoccupation. Every creak of the floorboards above me, every flicker of light outside my window made me jump, my mind racing through 1,000 scenarios, none of them comforting. Then came the night. I could no longer ignore it. The sounds from the ceiling, the sense of someone in the apartment above, had escalated. It wasn't just a random tapping or the occasional shuffle of a footstep. It was rhythmic, deliberate, almost like someone was testing the floor, walking a grid of my apartment, measuring my movements. By this point, my life had become a series of cautious routines designed to avoid detection. I made sure to leave at odd hours, always checked over my shoulder, and avoided the hallway whenever I could. But no matter how careful I was, no matter how hard I tried to outsmart whatever or whoever was watching, I always felt like I was losing. That night, the sound above me was louder than usual. A sharp, scraping noise echoed through the ceiling, a sound that felt intentional, like something was being dragged across the floor, waiting for the right moment. And then came the unmistakable sound of something sharp, metallic, almost like a drill. My heart skipped a beat. The exact sound of something burrowing through the ceiling. I could no longer wait for answers. My entire body was on edge, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. I grabbed the flashlight again, this time knowing I had to act. I pulled the chair over to the corner of the room, climbed up, and shone the light into the hole in the ceiling. To my horror, I saw another camera, this time larger, its lens staring back at me like a predatory eye. my stomach twisted in knots. This was no accident. I wasn't just being watched, I was being studied. The realization made my blood run cold. I had to do something, anything, to get out. As I frantically looked around for a solution, I remembered my neighbor's odd behavior. The way he'd always seemed to appear just when I needed him not to. The way he'd accidentally dropped the tools on my doorstep. The pieces started falling into place. The man in 2011, he wasn't just some weird neighbor. He was orchestrating this. The next night, when I heard the familiar sounds again, I decided to confront him. No more waiting, no more hiding. I waited until I could hear his movements above me, then quietly made my way to his apartment, my heart thumping in my chest. When I knocked on his door, I was prepared for whatever response came. But I wasn't prepared for the look on his face when he answered. His watery blue eyes flicked down to the lockpicks in my hand, then slowly, as if rehearsing for this moment, met my gaze. "You shouldn't have come," he said softly, his voice cold, too calm. "Now you know too much." The door opened wider, just enough to let me see the tools laid out on his kitchen table, spread across the room, like they were ready for the next job. "I always find the most interesting subjects." He continued, his smile twisting unnervingly. In that moment, I knew I had no choice. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. This was not a man, it was something else. Someone who had been tracking, controlling, studying my every move. And now, the nightmare was unfolding, right in front of me. The apartment, my home, was no longer mine, and I was no longer the one in control. I didn't look back as I ran down the hall, out of the building, and into the cold night air. I left everything behind, just as I had in the previous apartments. What else could I do? But no matter where I go, no matter how far I run, I can feel it, the presence. I can still hear the scratching in the walls and see the faint, flickering lights in the shadows. The cameras are always there, watching, waiting for the right moment. I don't know if I'll ever escape, but I do know this: sometimes the greatest violation is not being watched, it's being known. The narrative you shared is a series of chilling events that illustrate a gradual descent into paranoia madness and the horrifying realization that some spaces in our world are haunted not by ghosts, but by something far more insidious. Each story is a layer revealing the slow erosion of safety and privacy as forces beyond comprehension take root and control. Whether it's the eerie surveillance of a neighbor, the unnatural symbols spreading in an apartment, or the growing presence in the walls, each piece underscores the terrifying notion that the boundaries between worlds can be breached if we're not careful enough. The creeping sense of being watched, the loss of autonomy, and the invasive nature of these experiences create a mounting tension, making the reader feel as if they're slowly being drawn into a web that they can't escape. This collection of narratives touches on several universal fears: privacy being watched, and losing control of reality, and transforms them into something far more menacing. It's an unsettling exploration of the unknown, showing how seemingly innocuous things like an apartment or a neighbor can become prisons of the mind, where the true horror lies in what we cannot see, understand, or fight against. The final takeaway, that some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed again, encapsulates the inescapable nature of the terror. Your story is both a haunting cautionary tale and a psychological unraveling. It's deeply unsettling because it reflects real fears: being watched, being unable to trust one's own mind, and the terrifying idea that something beyond comprehension is always lurking just out of sight.